go. Oh, we're live. I'm sorry. Today we're
Woohoo!
facing so much technical difficulty. We're finally live. Hi, Danielle. Welcome to Winter with Grace today.
Hey, Grace, great to be here with you.
Yeah, as previously mentioned, I feel like I wanted to I wanted to say you guys have built a really amazing program at the Thiel Fellowship. Obviously, a lot of my friends who are just went on to do like amazing things. And um let's like start with maybe I don't know if it's too much detail about like the you were like a premature baby and like to like how do you like I guess like what were some key lessons that or you have like learned early on in your career that kind of shape you into who you are?
Yeah, absolutely. Gosh.
I'm
Well,
sorry,
yeah.
I'm like giving the audience so much like random detail.
No, it's good. I am a squirrel, so I love being like, all right, let's go all over the place. Let's do it.
Okay, love
Um,
that.
so yeah, I mean, yeah, I guess we're starting early. And what's kind of interesting is that about being born premature actually is that it takes a lot of technology to be able to be come into existence and have challenges, but then be born into a hospital system and technologies that can assist with that. Actually, apparently, my mom was her water broke 3 months early, which is incredibly early, and through doctors and science, they put a probe. Actually, I've never talked about this, so we're getting a super fresh story here. So not only was I preemie, and I was not born 3 months early, I was born 2 months early. And in fact, the first hospital my mother went to, and I grew up in the Boston area, so lots of good medical stuff going on here. The first hospital my mother went to, they said, "We do not know what to do with you. We have no clue. So you need to go somewhere else." So she went to a specialized hospital, the Brigham and Women's Hospital in Boston. And I don't know exactly the year that it started, but it was a newer hospital, that specialized in women and labor and delivery. And when my mom got there, they told her, and my mom was only 21 years old, so this very much freaked her out, and I was her first child. They told her that they were going to try to keep me inside her and put a probe on my head. So actually to this day, I have like a little bald spot because there's a scar on the top of my head from where they put this probe to monitor my growth. And so I jokingly always tell people, like, if someone ever says they're me, you should just check the top of their head. And, that's how you'll know. Like, that's like the eyeball scan of today is, do they have a little scar on the top of their head? But I ended up being able to be supported for an extra month. And one of the things with preemies is that sometimes their lungs don't develop correctly, especially at that stage. So they wanted to make sure that my lungs were as healthy as could be. So she was bedridden in the hospital for a month with this probe attached to my head to monitor growth. And they must have done all kinds of things. I don't even really know. And then a month later, I was born 2 months premature. And I was born just over 3 pounds. So I was a very, very tiny baby. I ended up being in the NICU for, I think, a month. And so, yeah, I've never thought about it this way, but it's like, yeah, it really goes back to science and innovation that I even really get to be here because, even if I hadn't necessarily like died as a super preemie earlier than this, but although the chances I would imagine would be quite likely. Preemies have all kinds of health complications, learning disabilities, all kinds of stuff. And I was pretty lucky to get through, as far as I can tell, mostly unscathed. So yeah, I really owe it to innovation and science and the care of, a whole team of doctors and staff that I'm here. And I've never made that connection before, actually. So thanks for bringing up the preemie thing, because yeah, that's some new way of looking at it. And so I have always had a really deep interest in science and tech. I've never like worked hands-on in the field, but I've always loved people who do. When I was in my 20s, I used to be part of a community called the California Futurists. And it's sad, but this community doesn't run anymore. But I'll plug another community that does run that I think is really, Not in place of, but doing the same thing. It's called the Foresight Institute. So if people are
Mhm.
looking for places to slot in with very interesting, forward-thinking scientists, the Foresight Institute is fantastic for this. But I was very lucky to slot into these communities of people because it really shaped my thinking when I was in my early adulthood. And when I joined the Thiel Fellowship, I had moved to the Bay Area after starting my charter school that's in San Diego called Innovations Academy. I was a school principal there for 2 years, ended up moving up to the Bay Area, learned that being a school principal was not my calling, but I love my school. I'm still on the board and very involved. And I didn't know what I was going to spend my time on here. And it was through a friendly connection that I heard about the Thiel Fellowship. And I thought, gosh, this is such a perfect blend for me. I've always loved education, and transformation in education. And I love science and tech, but I wasn't sure where am I going to make a difference there and where am I going to have some influence.
Mhm.
But being able to work with makers and scientists and support that ecosystem has always been really important to me. And that's what we're doing with 1517 today also.
Wow. I am so like, I guess like I'm really thankful that you're like vulnerably sure about your childhood journey, and I feel
Yeah, I
like
don't remember any of it. If anyone, I mean, honestly, when I think back to my mom being 21 years old and having that experience, I'm like, she experienced the trauma. I did not. I mean, yeah, I'm sure I experienced stuff, but I certainly don't remember any of it. And like anything that was traumatic, it like saved my life. So that's important. And is hashtag worth it.
oh wow.
But yeah, my mom is probably the one. I mean, my mom tells these stories of literally I was so small that I didn't fit in the crib. Like she was always, my mom's an anxious person. I've inherited some of that from her. And she was always really paranoid that I would like slip through the crib bars and like hurt myself or something like that. So I literally slept in a drawer that she made for me next to her nightstand. So she could like keep an eye on me, and she was too terrified to like co-sleep with me too, because she was like, I'm gonna roll over onto Danny and like squash her.
Oh
So yeah,
my
if
god.
anyone went through trauma, it was my mom.
Wow.
She might still be recovering, but yeah, I mean, for me, it's just a miracle.
Wow. I feel like that was like a really, I mean, like now you're perfectly fine. So
Yeah.
I feel like it's like
Yep.
completely hashtag worth it.
Yeah.
I like as a like I'm currently I just had a so I have a 9-month-old baby right now.
Oh,
So I feel like
congratulations.
I can totally relate to your mom. It's like, okay, if you co-sleep, you may roll over to sleep on the
Right.
baby.
Yeah.
And like, yeah, but it's crazy. I feel like motherhood is like a very different separate topic. So like,
Oh,
anyway, so you have started a charter school. Like, what is a charter
yeah.
school's differentiation between like a really like beside like a normal school? And I
Sure.
know that you were working with like gifted children, like, what does that entail? Like when like
Sure.
I guess what were the experience that kind of prepare you to run the Teal Fellowship and like
Sure.
now it is your own fund?
Sure, absolutely. So I think the community that prepared me the most for working with Teal Fellows and being on the founding team of that program was working with homeschoolers. I worked with a
Mhm.
secular homeschooling group in San Diego. I lived from the Boston area, but lived in San Diego for 7 years
Mhm.
in my early 20s. And those people really showed me what lifelong learning looked like. And I think people think that lifelong learning is about children, and it is, but it's really about human development all the way through and forward going into adulthood. And when I met these homeschooling families, and a lot of them were moms that I was meeting, they were always learning all the time too, and learning alongside their children and learning for the sake of their own
Mhm.
edification. And they were just very interesting people.
Mhm.
Um, and I remember when I started meeting them, I thought, gosh, these people are my tribe. Like, and they're showing me the visceral, like, I'm having the visceral experience of working with people who are very passionate and love what they're doing. And their family is led as a family and not just like the parents dictating, but like led with the children's input as well. And it was just really, really beautiful. And a colleague of mine and I, Christine Kuglin, started Innovations Academy, which is a charter school where we were really looking at, can we embed what we're doing in this homeschool co-op, and can we do it in a school setting? Because we would often have people come to us who wanted to participate in the co-op, but like weren't able to for various, reasons and logistics and things like that. And so we decided, hey, like, let's give this a go. Definitionally, a charter school is a public school. It is run with its own curriculum. You can, hire your own staff. You can have your own program. You do need to be, what's the word I'm looking for? You do need to be sanctioned by the district that you're in to run. So for example, the first 2 years of founding the school was writing a charter school petition. At the time, this was a 400-page document where it's kind of this funny thing where, it's sort of like the antithesis of a startup where you're supposed to do all this research about why everything you're going to do at your school is going to work. And then you get approved or not. And then you put that, charter into reality and you see what really happens. And it was interesting because we had to find research on all the different areas that we wanted to embed in the charter school, things like social emotional learning, things like student-led project-based learning. And we started writing the charter 17 years ago and took us 2 years to do it. And so at the time, things like social emotional learning and child-led project-based learning were like not known quantities at all. And then we were putting all these things together and layering it, and we had a full-time program and we had a part-time program for people who were homeschoolers. And, you never know how it's going to go. And there were 8 charter schools that started the same year that we did and got approved the same year that we did. But now we may be the only one actually who still exists. We opened in 2008, which is interesting because at the time, I was not aware of what was going on, like economically. I just knew gas prices were going up. I don't think I fully realized like, okay, we are moving into a recession here. But that had great effect on the school because we had budget cuts to go through. We had parents who had signed up for the school who were like, hey, gas prices are so high, I can't drive 15 or 20 miles to the school. Like one thing that's nice about a charter school is that students can come from all over a county or district. It's not that you have to be from the same neighborhood. And yeah, it was a big challenge to get started. But we had this sort of philosophy of treating, and still have this philosophy of treating children like humans who have agency and opinions. And a lot of what makes us different is that our like discipline that we do at school is not like, hey, you're going to get a star chart at the end of the day, or hey, we're working towards a pizza party. We don't do anything like that. A lot of it is honestly just like really talking to young people and students about, hey, how do you want to spend your time right now? And hey, we do have these things we have to do, but yeah, we can see there's a disconnect and you're not feeling motivated. Let's talk about that instead of it being about punishments and rewards. And again, at the time when we started, it was very novel. It was, even finding staff who could really enact on this philosophy, was challenging. But now, yeah, we serve 400 students today. And we've been going for a long time now. We have educators come in from all over the world to see what we're doing and tour the school, which is just a real treat. And still to this day, I'm friends with some of the families who were there early. And, I know no one uses Facebook anymore, but some people do. And I'll check in and see like, okay, this is what, this child and this family is doing now. So the school and working with the homeschoolers really primed me for the Thiel Fellowship because I was coming in with that independent learner, giving agency, talking with people about like, hey, why is this working or not working mindset, and then embedding that into the Thiel Fellowship program also. Yeah, I'm going from there.
Wow. I guess like who were the main people who would send students to your innovations academy? You mentioned
Yeah.
about like homeschool. Like
Yeah.
I only know probably one homeschooled person in my high school. I went to a private high school and in China. And then like before that, I only met like literally one person in my lifetime that I have interacted with when to was homeschooled. But like I wonder what's like the majority people who are homeschooling? And then obviously right now the school ecosystem like changed so much. Like a lot of the tech billionaires, they are like homeschooling their kids or technically having unique school for their kids.
Yeah.
I wonder how like who are the majority people who needed to be homeschooled, and like what are some unique thing that you mentioned about like um kind of introduce them to like lifelong learning
Mhm.
related like behavior? Like what were things that you have observed that were kind of like
Sure.
crucial?
Yeah, absolutely. Gosh, lots of thoughts there. What I was seeing almost 20 years ago when I was working with
Mhm.
homeschoolers is that there were some homeschoolers who were, they just knew philosophically, this is for us. We want to be more independent. And a lot of the homeschoolers I worked with were sort of more child led unschoolers, like being out in the community, going to different lessons in different places, having a co op somewhere in someone's garage. Um, it wasn't the we're doing school at home. Sometimes they're called school at homers, where it's like, hey, we have books and curriculum, but we don't really like go out in the community. We just do things here. And there's different choices that people make and how they do it. But some people have like a lot of conviction about homeschooling and know this is what I want to do. But a majority
Mhm.
of people that I've met over time, and even today, homeschool because there isn't something that they want out in the community.
Mhm.
Or for people that I was meeting in the past, they would send their children to kindergarten and then see how much was star charts and stickers and, hey, you'll get a gummy bear at the end of the day if you do this correctly. And the children responding really poorly to it. I had a friend whose son ran away from kindergarten, and she had been a teacher, so she was not in the like I'm going to homeschool my kids mindset. She'd been a public school teacher, and she just could not believe that her first child was having this very big response to the classroom.
Mhm.
But instead of saying, hey, you've got to deal with this, you have to do these things, or worst case is, hey, there's something wrong with you, you're defiant, you're this or that, she said, okay, this is not working, so I'm going to bring him home. And a lot of homeschoolers I've met do it because there isn't something that they're feeling really good about in the school system. But nowadays, too, it has changed where more people know about homeschooling. I think the misnomers about things like, oh, well, they're not socialized or things like that are really starting to fall by the wayside. And people understand that homeschooling means designing an independent study for your family, because it's not
Mhm.
just for that, one child. And I know people who have one child who's homeschooling, other kids who are in public school, other kids who are in private school, all in the same family. And so what they're doing is they're really choosing what works for that individual child. And so I really think anyone who is making a conscious decision about school is
Mhm.
a conscious educator. I think a lot of homeschoolers are conscious educators. And so to me, it doesn't matter so much if someone is like a homeschooler versus, hey, I found a great environment for my child and I'm consciously choosing this, and this is a fit right now. Hopefully it's still a fit later. If
Mhm.
it's not, we're going to choose something different. So that's kind of like my take on a lot of these things. And so at Innovations Academy, one thing that we have is we have basically like a no dumb homework policy, no worksheets, stuff like that. And one thing that we heard from the families who came the first year, especially, and I mean, they were really our our like frontier people, because we didn't
Mhm.
exist before. There was nothing to point to and say, hey, you should trust these people to educate your children.
Mhm.
And so they were nervous. They were like, okay, you're not going to do rewards and punishments, and there's no homework, and everyone at the school is on a first name basis. I was just Danielle there. I was not Miss Danielle. I was not Miss Strachman, nothing like that.
Mhm.
And it was a lot for people to swallow. Um, but I remember after the first set of parent teacher conferences, which were also student led,
Mhm.
like the students would
Mhm.
be there for those conferences, parents would say, gosh, we're seeing some really miraculous things happen. My child is reading for the love of reading at home again. Or I'll never forget, we had a fourth grader who just developed this particular passion for honey badgers, and she went down this deep honey badger rabbit hole, reading at home, and then came to the fourth grade teacher and said, hey, can I come and do a poster presentation about what I'm reading about at home? And the teacher said, sure, of course. And then the other students got really excited about it, and they started calling that a passion project, where it's like, oh yeah, like if you have a passion project you're doing and you want to come share it with other people, you can come do that here at school. And so we would see children picking up that motivation and intrinsic motivation on their own when there wasn't all the have tos that homework
Mhm.
does. And parents told us a lot about how, wow, wasn't it lovely that there wasn't fighting anymore at home over homework, and that they just had time to really be with each other. So that's
Mhm.
really important. And a lot of those first year parents who came, um, were very similar to what I was talking about earlier. They were looking for different options, couldn't really find them within the community, and word of mouth and things like that brought them to Innovations Academy. And we had parents who of just all different demographics, religious backgrounds, everything. And it was really interesting to see that people could come together over a shared vision of how they thought, um, a school environment could look.
Mm. I wonder, so this was, like, in another podcast you went on. I've heard that, like, you guys when you guys created the Thiel Fellow, you guys would, like, find students or, like, I guess, like, find students and then, like, chat with them and then kind of, like, being undercover to tell them, like, ask them questions, and then, in the end, if you found they're, like, the right fit, you would, like, maybe grade them into, like, different categories, like, based on their, like, characters, and, eventually, if they're, like, the right fit, you would ask them, like, "Hey, can I give you, like, $1,000 or something?" And then
Ah,
they start stuff, right?
yeah,
Like, uh like, I meet my friends, I think the badge becoming, if you would receive a X amount of dollar to quit school. So, I guess, like, it was, like,
yeah,
a very different, like, evolution of, like, different generations of founders. Obviously, you guys have some amazing founders, including some of my friends, as well as, like, the founder of Ethereum, obviously, and I wonder, can you tell us more about, like, what does Thiel Fellow means and, like, how does it evolve into, like, what it is today, and then
sure.
we can talk about your fund as well. Also saying hi to the audience. Hi, Avik. Anyway, keep going,
Hey,
sorry.
everybody. Thanks for
Okay.
listening.
Thanks for
Gosh, yeah. Let's see. I'm just thinking about everything that you put out. Um, Yeah, one of the things, there's a couple themes here. One of the themes is that I think most young people are used to winning an award for something they did in the past, not
Mm,
being given resources for something they might do in the future. And that was very much part of the underpinning with the Thiel Fellowship, and now with 1517. And you mentioned our grant program, which is the Medici Project, where we give people $1,000 to just get started on something. That's a pure grant. We don't own people. We don't own their stuff. Um, and it's just really interesting to see what happens there, because like the other theme that comes to mind there is trust. We are offering trust to young people to try something out and do something. And I think there's something about that combination of resources and trust that gives people permission to do not only what they thought they might do with something like the Thiel Fellowship time, or being a 1517 founder, but also sometimes to dream bigger. I think one of the things that we didn't anticipate in the fellowship was, we thought that when people were applying to it and we were interviewing people, that whatever the thing is that they were coming in with, we thought that would be the thing that they would stick with.
mhm,
And I even had these experiences myself growing up, where I would think to myself, oh, if I get this opportunity, in this case, it was like, if I get into this certain school, of course I will go, or something like that. And then I remember getting accepted to the school I wanted to go to, and the reality of it made me question, well, did I really want that? And I think there was something that was happening too with especially the early Thiel Fellows. I was there in the first 5 years, where they would think, oh, okay, I'm going to work on this particular project. Laura Deming comes to mind with her work, because it originally looked like doing longevity research.
Mm-hmm.
But then when she got the Thiel Fellowship, I think there was something about that trust and that permission that made her think even bigger. And she came to us shortly thereafter and said, I want to start a venture fund that funds longevity work. And I think that's going to really uncap health span and lifespan. And she was 16 or 17 when she joined the program. And we were the program that's motto was some ideas just can't wait. And I remember when she pitched us on like this venture fund, I knew like our motto is some ideas just can't wait. Like, okay, we need to be supportive of this. And I remember being really nervous. Like none of us on our team knew anything about starting a venture fund. And we had thought the scope of what Laura was going to do was going to be like kind of defined and clear for the 2 years. And then she really let the roof off of it and did something truly extraordinary. And Laura has raised multiple funds that focus on longevity and health span, and she's making an incredible impact there. So there's something about that trust and giving yourself permission and having the resources to do something that really changes the game, even more so than what we originally thought was going to happen with the program. So that was a really big insight for us. And there was a second piece of your question, but I've lost it.
Yeah. So I wonder, what was some like criteria that kind of went into when you're like selecting these younger founders?
Oh, sure. Yeah, there were a bunch of things. One of the traits, Michael and I, he's my co-founder at 1517, was also on the leadership team of the Thiel Fellowship. We've had to come up with our own lexicon of what we look for. And there's a great chapter in Michael's book, Paper Belt on Fire, that goes through all of these attributes. And one of them we call hyperfluency. So it is this ability to talk backwards and forwards about a space. And there's also a particular energy about it where, when you talk, I mean, at least my response to hearing someone who's very excited about something is to be even more excited about it. Maybe other people have a different response to that, but we love that. And it sort of has this quality of sitting on the edge of your seat, kind of like, oh, wow, like, you're at a sporting event and wow, there's really something about to happen. And you can sort of hear that in what they're talking about. And there's a second quality of clearly seeing that this is something that people are eating, breathing, drinking. Someone like Laura is a great example of this. Someone like Vitalik is a great example of just like going very deep in an area. But there's a second piece to this quality that is really important. And it is how someone communicates and who they communicate to and how they scaffold their language. So this question is, can this person talk to, someone else who is, as passionate, as learned, maybe more so in the field than they are? And can they talk to someone who knows nothing about it, who's a total like neophyte? That's important too, because you're building teams of people, and some people are going to know more than you, and some people are not going to know anything about the area, and you have to bring everyone along for that ride. That's what a good leader does. So that's a trait that we look for. And we also really looked for at the fellowship, and now with 1517, this ability to execute and get started. One of the things that we look for is like people who have like a big vision of what they want to do, like the 10-year, it's way out there. It probably sounds crazy or absurd. We used to ask people, what do you want to make absurd? Like when we look back and say, wow, wasn't that ridiculous that, we only live so long, or that we drove cars, or, whatever it is. But then we also would ask them like, okay, here's the big mission, but like, I'm like trying to stay in the frame here, but what are you doing on Friday to get started? So like, what little steps can you take? And then that gives us some sense of there being a way to flesh out this big idea and how they're executing on it today, and it not being a, well, someday I will do that thing, but it's something that they're doing now. So those are a couple traits that we looked for. And then one trait that was really important to us was curiosity. The people that we work with are highly curious people. I often say they are 2 standard deviations out on curiosity. So yeah, they are just sort of insatiable in that way, and usually about different topics. So sometimes I like to ask people, like, tell me about your childhood. What were you really into? What were those rabbit holes that you went down? Or what's one that you're looking forward to exploring in the future? Or do you have any inclinations? And sometimes it will really come out in things like, hobbies and side things as well. Because, as a teacher, one of the things that we often talk about in education is like, catching somebody when nobody's watching. It's like, what is this person doing when there's no reward, when there's no reason to do it? What does that look like? And it might be diving into a particular field. It might be excelling at some sort of extracurricular, like whatever it is. And those things are really, really important to us.
I wonder, like, what were these people doing before you met them? Since they
Sure.
were like very young, and I'm sure probably some of them win some sort of like awards or some getting some recognition from
Sure.
press. But I wonder, like, how do you kind of like
Yep.
find these like
Sure.
people across the globe?
For us, it was really interesting in the early days of the Thiel Fellowship. I think more of the fellows today have been more recognized for what they're doing. But when we were there, we were really looking for people who were super nascent, hadn't necessarily received a lot of recognition, but it was sort of a mixed bag. We had some people who had never been sort of recognized for anything and were these just like undiscovered gems. And then we had people who had done things like winning science fairs and things like that. And what was interesting to us was that there was an inverse correlation. We sometimes found that people who, in the first year of the fellowship, we asked for AP tests, which I was not a particular fan of, but the application was already out there. And I was like, all right, I can't get this changed right now. But there was an interesting inverse correlation between, someone might have a bunch of 5s on their APs and they've won a science fair, but there's something about that kind of person doing really well in a super structured environment where, here's how you get the A. But entrepreneurship and starting projects, there is no guidepost for like, oh, this is what it looks like to succeed here, and this is how you get the A. It's much more fluid, and there's a lot that's out of your control. I mean, you can be a great founder and start things in the wrong environment or the wrong time, or something like COVID happens in the middle of everything that you're working on, or a market crashes, and you can't control those things. So it takes somebody who is incredibly flexible to build a project or a company. And winning awards as a young person or scoring highly on a test doesn't necessarily take a lot of flexibility. So that's another trait, that we would look for, sometimes like flexibility in their thinking. I remember this one young man who was a finalist in the first year. I really wanted to bring him in as a fellow. And every time we asked, hey, if what you're working on does not work, like, what would you do? And he sort of gave the traditional, like, well, I'll just keep trying answer. And like, that's very admirable. But what we were looking for was, I will figure out something else, even if it's totally different. That would have made us a yes. But he just kept sticking to like, I'll just keep going. And we were like, and going into this particular arena, we're like, oh man, like we're just looking for a little more flexibility here. So those are a couple things that come to mind. And, people who are starting to get started and showing, I think before we brought Nikolic on as a Thiel fellow, he was certainly already working on the white paper for Ethereum, and like was already dedicating his life to that. Like he had made that choice. Some of the Thiel fellows that we worked with were in school, but were really butting up against time constraints of, gosh, we had an old Thiel fellow Tom Courier in the first batch, who was working on a robotics company. And, he was just, did not have enough time to do that while he was also in school. And some of the old Thiel fellows we worked with had never even stepped foot in a college. So that was also interesting as well. So there was sort of people coming in from school, not school, most of them had started something with what they were doing. That was something we wanted to see. What we didn't want to see was, oh, well, if I get the Thiel Fellowship, then I will start doing this thing that's important to me. Because to me, that is more of the, I want to try to win an award mindset rather than I want to garner resources because I'm so dedicated to this that, I'm spending whatever time I can right now on it.
I wonder to recognizing the talent, you mentioned like there are some like hidden gems.
Yeah.
So were they applying for Thiel Fellowship back in time, or like how do you go to like each school to be like, I don't know, drive a van to there?
Yeah, it was both inbound and outbound. I was talking to someone the other day who's starting a new program, and he was like, yeah, we're going to do this whole like tap on the shoulder thing and you need to be recommended. And I was like, wrong answer. Like you're going to get some good people that way. But especially when you're working with young people, you can't expect them to have a network. And so, the application was open. We learned a lot about going out to different types of communities to like get people to know what the Thiel Fellowship was. We would do talks in high schools and colleges. We were really putting it out there, and we loved, when people came in cold, like, because these people are teenagers, like they're not supposed to have a network already. If they had, in my opinion, if they had a network, they were probably already off to the races. In fact, there were very early Thiel Fellowship finalists who like already kind of were off to the races with what they were doing. And we said, well, we think that this is for the very early nascent people who don't have that. So let's put nonprofit dollars towards that. And I think that's worked out extraordinarily well, although, the program has expanded both in age and stage of the people who go in now. And I do wish that more people were given a shot earlier. And we also we called people our frequent flyers. We might have someone who applied at 15 years old to the fellowship, and, we would kind of track what happened over the years in their application. And we had one person, Thomas Somers, who is starting a newer company now called Positron. He was one of the earlier Thiel Fellows, but he probably started applying at 14 or 15. And then he got the fellowship when he was 17. He did not even finish high school. And I remember talking to his mom, and I was like, hey, we're not going to make him drop out of high school. Like, that's not what we're here to do. Like, we're not ready to tackle that one yet. But she was adamant. She's like, no, he's ready to go. He wants to do this. So he got his GED and then started the Thiel Fellowship. And it was great to be able to see like, okay, here's this application at 14, then 15, then 16. And actually, we also had events where we got to meet applicants in person, just as like a community builder. And it was so wonderful because I remember Thomas running around with a prototype he had built, and he'd come and show us what he had done. And, that's so much more engaging than any application you're going to read from somebody. So we loved doing those applicant events because, I often say both about applications and decks that, everyone is a 10X on their materials. And, you're a 3D person and your application or your deck is a 2D, material. So it's not really you.
I have like a couple questions there in terms of like, Thiel Fellow transition into like a successful like entrepreneurship.
Sure. Yep.
I wonder, do you feel like the people who you identified early on that are like, oh, wow, this person's like a category in like
Sure.
everything. And then like they turn out to be like a tier one founder versus like the, maybe like this person have like a diverse kind of like strengths and weakness or whatever, like it's like a more balanced person. They went on to be a better founder.
Let's see. I mean, people have gone on to do all kinds of different things. Like, some people have founded their own companies. Some people have worked in industry. I think of people like Chris Ola. So he came into the Thiel Fellowship with a lot of ideas about additive manufacturing and 3D printing. And along the way, he started geeking out really hard on, ML and what has become generative AI. And this was like 12 years ago before really anyone was thinking about it. And he's become one of the sort of forerunning researchers in that zone now. So yeah, Chris has very much been at the foundational layer of what now everybody is building their companies off of. Has he, founded a company? No, but he's made incredible contributions. And then we've had other Thiel fellows where, they figured out, hey, I want to do this type of work in this field, and they're working with other companies and people. We had only a very small handful who actually went back to school and fully got their degree. What was interesting is we had a couple people who went back to school. I can think of someone like Eden Full in that first year. She was working on a nonprofit. It was all going well. She decided at the end of her fellowship that she did want to go back to school. She went back and she took a few classes in engineering that she really wanted, but then the school told her that she needed to finish these multiculturalism courses, and she had traveled the world with her nonprofit. She had been setting up sort of energy systems in different villages in Africa, and she thought it was completely ridiculous that now she needed to sit in a classroom when she had actually like firsthand experience in these ways. And so she dropped out again and didn't get the degree because she didn't think it made sense to like go through coursework that, I don't think I'm being too much to say this, but she probably could have taught those classes. And I think a lot of students have had that experience, and you see this in a lot of schools where you can't just say, hey, you know what, I really want to take this class or test into this thing. Oh no, you have to start over at 101. And a couple founders who were at and were going to go to MIT who became Thiel Fellows, Ari and Conrad from Workflow, which was acquired by Apple a bunch of years ago. And now they have a new company they're working on. But I remember talking to them and they were saying, yeah, it just seems ridiculous that we have 9 years of coding experience and started when we were children, and we have to start over in these CS classes and take the 101 classes. So we saw all kinds of different outcomes from people in the fellowship, whether it sometimes making a really big career trajectory change for them. Some of them founding companies, some of them making some really interesting novel contributions to research. And the thing that I always said about the fellowship was that it's a 2-year program with a 10-year timeline. And that's really come true, where we can see over time what has happened with these people. And that what I've always wanted for things like the Thiel Fellowship or 1517 to be for people is that chance to take a left turn and see what happens, and it to be the start of something. So yeah, really, really glad and proud to see that working out in a positive direction.
I wonder, what does this like translate to people who are not young anymore? Because I feel like in Silicon Valley, the young has like a new standard. As like right now, there's like people in their like teenage year running like $20 million funds, right? So like I feel like this is a new standard for Silicon Valley. And people over age 25 is kind of like old and consider like in their entrepreneurial career.
Yeah, that always makes me really sad, and I know I have something to do with that meme. And
I also feel like it's kind of also like, do you get the stamp early, right? Like, so it's kind of like, because coming from abroad, like I was an international student, like, so even for figuring out the visa thing, like for many years, like, you can't work, you can't do XYZ, and like you're gonna be, I don't know, like getting into some like challenges in even like the small category of things, like just like, I don't know, there's so many things that like different people have to go through. I'm not saying like this is just like one example, right? There's like the language challenge for a lot of people living in Silicon Valley, and then there is like if you're non-technical, is your life
Sure.
just like absolutely done? Like,
Yeah.
and I feel like it's very like, and then like when I'm observing a lot of people, when they kind of like get the recognition early on, their life is a lot more smoother, as like they went
Yeah.
through, like they got the stamp of Thiel Fellowship, they got the
Sure.
stamp of Forbes 30 out of 30, they got the stamp of like Stanford or Harvard
Yeah.
or something somewhere, and their life is sort of like set as like people gave them recognition early on, so they kind of like smooth sailing to a degree. I'm not saying it's easy for them. I'm saying it's
Sure.
easier than a lot of people who may not have the privilege of even hearing about program like
Sure.
this exist. I wonder what can they do in their life to kind of like establish themselves into a certain category of things.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think I keep going back to this idea of some ideas just can't wait, and that is applicable to everybody. Um, I think what's harder as we mature is that people tend to get very comfortable in what they have, whether, and a lot of the like higher level message of something about the fellowship is don't let an institution tell you what you can and can't do. And that might be higher ed, that might be large companies, that might be the government, like it might be any number of things. There there are lots of ways to get started on something, and I agree with you that there is, especially in the Bay Area, a big focus on young talent. But we do see other programs that are out there that are sort of age-based that are more expansive, and these lists that might get people certain signal. I do think that there are downsides to some of these signals. You hear about sort of like people who are branded as prodigies when they're children, and then sort of like they can't live up to the expectations that society, the world, their town, their families, have put on them over time. Um, and there also is a bias in the opposite direction. Lots of people ask me about like, oh, well, what are all the issues these super green, super young founders make? And, at 15, 17, we don't have an age requirement. If someone is an OG dropout, and they're what society would call a fully fledged adult, like we're happy to look at stuff. And those people have very similar, challenges as young people do. Um, so I don't think it's like necessarily black and white, but because of some of the bias of, oh well, young people don't have experience and they can't possibly lead a team or run a company, there are lots of other sort of institutions on the VC side and otherwise that will fund people who have more experience. I think sometimes it can be a little bit harder to get started. Like I would love to see more programs that have something like we do with the Medici project to get people started really early with like a small grant or something like that. A friend actually was just posting about like I don't know if it was like a writer's fellowship. I can't remember if there was money attached to it, but you had to be at least 50 years old to apply for it. And I thought that was fantastic. I was like, this is really great. Like, because it's saying like, hey, we're targeting a specific demographic here, people who have lived a bunch of life, and now are starting to move into writing. And I thought that was really, really great. But I think that there are lots of different avenues for starting something, no matter what your age is. And like, if you let age become a barrier to getting started, I mean, it's going to be that much harder because you're getting in your own way too of, oh, well, yes, these things are challenging and they're hard, but the best people that we work with are always thinking about what can I do? Like what programs can I apply to? What accelerators, what funds? And there are lots of funds that would never touch the people that we touch. So I don't know. I don't think that's a complete answer there. I do wish there were more groups that funded more people just doing radical work, no matter what their age happens to be. But I also don't think people necessarily need to be dissuaded because of there being a focus on young talent.
I wonder, I want to touch about like your fun a little bit. So like, can you chat more about like, how did you pivot from working at the Thiel Fellowship, the Thiel Foundation to starting your own
Yeah.
fund?
Yeah, absolutely. So we are coming up on it's just about 9 years since we started the fund, which is blowing my mind. Which means the fellowship is 14 years old, which is also blowing my mind. I go to high schools and give talks, and it might be the first year class, and like, oh yeah, these people are 14. They were just being born when our work was just getting started here, which is really interesting. But what we were seeing 5 years into the fellowship was one, that investors did not take our young people seriously. There is a lot of lip service paid to young talent, but I think the translation of that, and I think this is still true today, is come work at my portfolio companies, not I want to give you money. And I think few people are sort of tuned into that. That's what they actually mean. So people don't say that, but I do think it's what they mean. And then in addition, we saw that, 5 years in, we were starting to see the early success of things like Figma and Ethereum and the Longevity Fund and other companies like Paul Gu's Upstart. There were a good handful. We had 8 outperforming companies at that time who had all, I think, reached Series A funding or above. And, we don't count our chickens before they hatch. And so we didn't know where things were going, but we knew that there was some traction there. And what we also saw was that we had applicants who I just felt like it was a shame that we couldn't work with them because, the fellowship, as generous as it is still only about 20 people per year. And it's stayed that way for the entire 14 years now. So there's this intuition we were having of that we could scale our work and we could have a fellowship as a fund. Sometimes I call out 1517 Fellowship 2.0, because it's also a way to continue working with the people that we started with. So we funded some of the earlier Thiel Fellows. We funded people who are from the applicant pool. We go out and we meet with lots of young people in high schools and colleges and dropouts from all over. So it's not just, we're not like a Thiel Fellowship fund or anything like that. I was headed somewhere. Hold on, train of thought, like went in 3 directions at once. Hold on, bring it back. Oh, yes. So yeah, I mean, the real thing that we saw was that we could scale our work with what we were doing. And we had some novel ideas for how we might work with dropout founders and move things forward and be able to write bigger checks and just really expand the work that we were doing. So we took that idea to Peter 9 years ago. We had a 1-pager, just one piece of paper that had the 8 outperforming companies on it. And we went to him and we said, we think there's a case for a Fellowship 2.0 as a venture fund. We just, we actually were telling him we're going to leave the foundation to give this a go. Essentially, please don't be mad at us for leaving our jobs. We had the team already in place to, carry on the mission of the fellowship. And I thought Peter was going to be mad at us. And instead he got very excited. And he asked us in that meeting, this was a breakfast meeting at his house. He said, well, and this was just me and Michael there. And he said, well, how much do you guys want to raise? And we didn't really know very much about fund economics or really, we didn't know anything. And we said, we're thinking about raising 10 million. And, Peter's very thoughtful. So of course he paused and you could tell he was thinking. And, he looked back at us and he said, well, you should raise 15 and I'll be 4 of it. And we were like, I remember I smiled so big it covered my mouth. I thought I robbed a bank. I was like, oh my God, we just got a commitment for more money from Peter than we ever have for any one operational year of the fellowship. This is wild. And Michael and I left that meeting and we high-fived and said, we have to go raise a venture fund now. Oh my God. So that got us started. But it was really this want to expand on what we were doing. And we also saw that the financial opportunity was quite great. We thought to ourselves, I remember sometimes trying to refer Thiel Fellows to investors and they wouldn't even take a phone call. And I thought, why am I trying to make that guy money, when maybe we could actually do well, and do good at the same time. So that's what got us started.
I wonder when on the paper of the 8 breakout companies. Like, what stage of breakout were they in? Like, were they, I don't
It
know.
was early. It was really, really early. I mean, I think for the companies on there, uh, maybe Dylan was gearing up to raise the Series B at that point. I can't quite remember, but most of them were like Series A companies. It was, still in the life of a startup, very early, teams, at a Series A stage of around, like 20 to 50, depending on what people were doing. So super, super early. Ethereum was showing some really good signs, for taking off. So that was there as well. And of course, Ethereum is not a startup, but it was sort of this point of, hey, we think we have an eye for spotting talent and working with
Mhm.
people. And now we just want to do it at a new level. So yeah, it was still very early in terms of outcomes, because it was only 5 years into the fellowship. And, now the fellowship's success is, not only undisputed, but people feel like it's this best kept secret. And we never tried to keep it a secret, but I think people just didn't like believe in this, hey, it's a 2-year program with a 10-year timeline. People always wanted to see like, oh, well, someone needs to IPO within 2 years. And it's like, well, that's ridiculous.
Hmm.
But we've had a number of Thiel Fellows get to that kind of level. Someone like Austin Russell with Luminar and coming out in the latest Volvo. So it's really exciting to see where things are going.
What was the program like? What's within the program? Like, how much do you think it's like credit to the founder's own like ability to generate stuff out of nothing
Sure.
versus like how much help you have to give them for them to help them succeed?
Sure. Yeah. And when I think about help, what I really think is about community. And I think being part of a supportive community where you can be yourself and ask questions, uh, and get help. And that community was Thiel Fellows, mentors in the program, the staff. And it's hard to say, like, how much was this and how much was that? I certainly put, most of the credit on the Thiel Fellows themselves. Like, these are high agency people who had to be out there doing really, really hard work. At the same time, we did see that having support matters and having funding to get started, matters, and having a community of people who are all rallying around you and saying, yes, go do that crazy big new idea that wasn't even your application for the Thiel Fellowship. I do think that matters. An experiment that I always wanted to run but never got to was, I always loved all of the finalists. It was so hard to choose, like, okay, who should get a fellowship and who shouldn't. And like the like I don't know, educational psychological researcher in me wanted to do hey, what if we just took the batch, because we always took half of them because it was usually 40 finalists. What if we just random took 20 and like, let's see what happens, because then we actually might get to measure some of, hey, actually the resources are really important, and people being able to give themselves more permission from getting this resource is important. But we were not able to run that experiment. But I do think that it is a combo. And so I think, something that people could more broadly do is look for communities that help each other and support each other. When I was younger, I studied what's called La Belle Epoque, which is, the beautiful time in Paris, which is, between, I don't know, the late 1800s and early 1900s. And this is like when a lot of the impressionistic art scene was taking off, in Paris. And these people did not do it in a vacuum solo. They did it meeting at cafes and talking about what they were doing and collaborating. And, people have written lots of books about this kind of topic, of that being within a community of people does appear to have an effect on the output of people's ability, work, creativity, and so on. So I do think there's something there.
I don't know if I have a couple more minutes.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
have a
I have
quick
a couple more minutes. I got to start
okay.
finishing up, but yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So I wanted to learn more about like what does the supporting look like from Till Fellow? Like, so what
Oh,
does a
sure.
program look like?
Yeah.
Is that
Yeah.
courses or
Sure. So, okay. So, okay, I'll answer in two ways. I'll answer first with philosophy, and then I'll answer with structure. So the philosophy was, hey, these are high agency people and we believe in them and we believe they can make their own decisions. At 1517 and the Thiel Fellowship, we tell people the same thing all the time, founders. We say, you're the captain of the ship. We're here, we're like navigators. We might be in the crow's nest and say, hey, we see an iceberg ahead, but you're the captain. So you get to choose, like, do you think it's an iceberg? Like, is our assessment right? Are you going to go around it? Do you think you have an amazing battering ram that you're just going to go straight for it? Like, they are the captain of the ship. And I think that is really, really important. We never call them kids. We don't use that language. I think things like that are really important, that you're showing, hey, we are on even footing here. And what we also talked about both at the fellowship in 1517 was like, I'm not going to force you to do anything. There's not like a curriculum you have to go to. We would have events and they were optional. And I used to always tell people, this is a buffet. And if you're not hungry for what's at the buffet, I'm not going to force feed you to eat. If you want to be force fed, like, go back to school. Like, that's what school is for. So for us then, on a structural level, there were lots of places to slot in terms of events we had, speakers who came in, retreats we would have, but it was up to the people to choose. I think the one thing that we didn't really have, there wasn't choice around, was, hey, we want to have a review with you every couple of months to check in and see how things are doing. We know that builders really need to be heads down, but it's also really good to come heads up and talk about how things are going. But outside of that, it was a lot of buffet style of like, hey, you can come choose to do this or not. So that has always been important to me in structure for high agency people. I think it's a misnomer that high agency people don't need support, but they need the right type of support. And I don't think they need like highly structured, hey, you have to be here at this time taking in this content. And having been a teacher, it would sometimes honestly be frustrating for me, because sometimes people don't know when something's going to be relevant to them. And what we did find both in the fellowship and with 1517 is that people want information when the house is just slightly on fire. I remember we would host these negotiation workshops, and like a small handful of people would come to them, and I say, oh, I'm curious, like feedback, like, why didn't you kind of come to the negotiations workshop? Oh, well, I don't have anything I'm negotiating. I'm like, in my mind, you're negotiating every day of your life. Like, this is just like life skill stuff. But you can't, there's like a, you can't, God, why am I losing the adage right now? Like, you can't make a horse, you can't make a horse drink water. I'm not saying you're right, but whatever that adage is.
Okay, amazing. So we
Yeah.
have a 1-minute fire round for you. First question, what's your favorite book?
Favorite book. I'm going to go with the Golden Compass series by Philip Pullman. Just love it. It's not one book, it's 3 books.
Who would you invite to your dinner party?
Maria Montessori. If I could talk to someone, I would love to have her.
Who made the biggest impact in your career?
Probably Lindy Fishburne, who was at the Thiel Foundation and called me before I joined and said, the foundation has lost their minds. You have to get over here. And that was the start of my involvement with the Thiel Fellowship.
Where can we find you outside work?
Where can you find me outside of work? Doing movement stuff, art stuff, music stuff. Yeah, all those things. I love doing all those things on a hike. Yeah.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show today.
Thank you so much for having me, Grace. This was really fun.
Awesome. Okay, let me just